I've always been ambivalent, but throughout my life I've tried to do the right thing and I think I've done it pretty well. However, when I was a teenager, I began to notice that I felt dissatisfied with my life. I wanted more than what surrounded me. I lived with my parents and 2 younger sisters. We were a rather poor family, but my parents worked harder to allow us the basic things in life. I was 16 years old, I studied in a regular provincial school, I had 6 months before my final exams, and a little more before I entered college. I had a friend, his name was Joe. Unlike me, Joe was from a wealthy family. Already at the age of 16, he had a good car, an expensive telephone, he had his own large room and, in general, he was completely satisfied with his life. Joe often invited me to parties, but I always refused, saying that I had a lot to do, and that I was not particularly eager. But as you already understood, this was not the problem at all, because every teenager is eager to get to a party, relax and unwind. I didn't really have the money to hang out with him. He and his friends rented a cottage for parties, bought a lot of alcohol, called girls. I didn't have the financial resources for this, and in general I didn't have anything to go there. I did not have beautiful clothes and outfits for going out. I would be just ashamed to appear there in my clothes. One fine day, when Joe again shared his impressions after yesterday's party, I was completely disappointed with my life. It was the last straw. I decided that I needed to leave it all behind, leave the poor life in the past and take action, break out of poverty and routine life. That evening, I began to think through a plan of action. How can I say goodbye to a poor life once and for all? That's when I decided to steal money from my parents. They were saving themselves to buy a new family car. I knew this fact very well, and most importantly, I knew where the money was kept. They were in a safe behind my father's closet, which was in his office. It was just impossible to enter there, because Dad worked there all day, and at night I couldn't go there either, because I had to go past the room where my parents slept. I understood that my house is never empty, and this was the first problem. I began to think about how to get them out of the house for a day. And it was at that hour that my cunning plan matured in me. My grandmother lived outside the city. She lived alone, because she divorced her grandfather 20 years ago. I used to visit her every weekend and help with the garden. She often told me that she did not have enough hands to put her attic in order. She dreamed of making something like a winter garden there. And taking into account this factor, I told my grandmother that my family and I can help her, you just need to make sure that they come to her for a day. That is, the task of the grandmother was to invite them to visit, and I would have already forced my parents to help clean up the attic. And so my plan starts to work. Grandmother called them to the dacha. I told my parents about the winter garden, and they were happy to help her. And I knew that my parents were merciful and would never refuse to help her. As a result, one Saturday morning, my parents and my sisters are going to my grandmother, and then the second part of my plan is included. I tell them that I completely forgot that I have a Latin test on Monday and I need to study for it, and therefore, alas, I will not be able to go. My sisters were the most upset, because we already spend too little time together. But everyone reacted with understanding, they left for their grandmother, and then the third step of my plan enters. Safe point. Before touching the safe, I wanted to wait for time. You never know, parents will forget something and return home. I went to the kitchen, made myself some tea, sat down on a chair and slowly sipped it from a glass. I waited a sufficient amount of time and realized that it was time to act. I went up to the second floor, went to my parents' room, and something seemed to stop me. It was as if I heard someone's voice in my head, which was shouting to me, "Don't do this, you will regret it," but there was no stopping me. I opened the door to my parents' bedroom, looked around, and right at the moment when I started to approach the office, the cornice with curtains falls straight to the floor. This has happened before, it is poorly fixed, but at that moment I thought that this was a sign from above that you should not do this, you should not steal money from your parents. But as I said earlier, I was already unstoppable. I saw only one goal in front of me, to leave my parental home and start my path to success. And for this, I needed startup capital in the form of accumulated parental money, because I didn't have time to work, combining work with study. And here I am, step by step, approaching my father's office, thinking about what awaits me next. I go to the door, I already want to pull the handle, when suddenly someone called me. I was very scared, because I was focused on committing an attack. I took my phone out of my pocket and saw that my grandmother was calling me. I was thrown into a cold sweat, I began to get paranoid. And suddenly, my parents somehow found out everything. Suddenly my grandmother calls for a reason, all of a sudden it's all a setup from my parents, and they guessed what I was doing here. I picked up the phone, my grandmother spoke and I calmed down. She called me because she found out that I was preparing for a Latin test. She informed me that she understood it well, and I could come and she would be happy to help me. I thanked my grandmother and said that I could handle it myself and everything was fine. Saying goodbye to my grandmother and set to work. I pulled the cabinet handle and found that the door to my father's office was closed. I was disappointed and began to panic, when suddenly the thought came to me that any problem can be solved. What matters is your desire. I immediately began looking around my parents' room, looking for the keys in each of the closets. As a result, I did not find the keys and was about to leave the room, but suddenly I found my father's laptop bag lying on the closet. I remembered that he kept the spare keys to the house in it, and I thought, why not check it, because the keys to the office might also lie there. I climbed into a chair, reached for the lid of the closet, threw my bag on the floor and began to search. I opened the first section and immediately found a bunch of keys there. There were 12 keys, I had no idea which doors each one went to. I went to the door with this bunch and started to try each one of them. Surprisingly, I quickly found the right key and opened the door. Next in front of me was the same safe. I smiled slyly, I imagined my future life. I was certain that one of those 12 keys was the right one for this safe. But it was not there. Wu found a code lock on the safe. Code lock on safe. I thought that my mission had failed and I could not open the safe. But I should have tried the safe, I didn't see another scenario. I went to the safe, squatted down and began to think logically. I entered various numbers there. Dad's date of birth, my mother's date of birth, the date of birth of me and my sisters. I even entered the number of the minibus there, on which Dad has been traveling for 14 years. But it wasn't, nothing was right. I was sure that the digital code was associated with some important numbers for Dad. Dad liked to attach great importance to small things, so he certainly did not enter random numbers there. I began to sort through all the important events in my dad's life. I noticed that the safe was painted the color of an army camouflage. One thought occurred to me, I remembered that my father served in the army, he was a tanker. I thought that the code might be related to the army. Without thinking twice and remembering the stories of my father, I remembered that the first tank on which he moved was the M551 Sheridan. I entered the numbers 551 into the code line, and I heard a click. I was very happy when I realized that the door had opened. I was excited and at the same time scared that the future would be even harder than living this day. I didn't know what was in my path, but I was sure that everything would be fine and that I would succeed in my mission. I found the money bag in the safe and took everything I found there. I was so happy with my success that I almost forgot about the consequences of my actions. As soon as I stole the money, I ran away from home and went to another city to start my new life. I was prepared to return to my family someday and apologize for my behavior, but at that moment I couldn't handle my emotions in my childhood home. After a few months, I realized that I had everything I wanted, but I felt unspeakably lonely and bored. I realized that I have no purpose and no meaning in life. I started thinking about how to get back to my parents, but I didn't know how to explain that I stole money from them. My money ran out and I had to find a job. I found a job at a construction site and started doing everything to feel secure and independent. However, my emotions and feelings could not cope with the great guilt that I felt all this time. Every day when I thought about my parents, I got the feeling that I had severed the connection between us. I didn't know how to explain to them that I stole money from them, and I didn't know how to get it all back. Over the next few years, I continued to work in construction and tried to find my way in life. I made enough money to rent an apartment and pay for other large expenses, but I could not find a purpose for my life. As I approached my 30th birthday, I realized that my life had not brought me any meaning or real satisfaction. I realized that I not only stole money from my parents, but also lost the most important thing for me, that is, my family and connection with them. I decided to return to my hometown and try to mend my relationship with my family. I was ready to ask them for forgiveness for my mistakes and was ready to do everything to get my family back. When I arrived in the city, unfortunately, I found out that my parents had retired and moved to another state. I was completely shocked by this news and did not know what to do next. I started looking for a new job and thinking about my real purpose in life. As I traveled around the country, I realized that all is not lost and I can still mend my relationship with my family. I decided to keep searching for my life purpose and never forget the people who have always been there for me. One fine day, when I was on the train, I happened to meet my father. He was very surprised to see me, and so was I. We didn't know what to say to each other after so many years of not seeing each other. Dad got old, and I lost the spark in my eyes and most of my youth. We talked, and I told him about everything that had happened to me in recent years. I sincerely apologized for my mistakes and said that it really hurts to understand that I have lost the most valuable thing in my life. Both of us could not contain our emotions and wept. I will never in my life forget the day I ran away from home, and this day when after so many years I met my parents. Our meeting ended with my parents returning their love and support to me. I again felt childish carelessness and the fact that someone needs me on this planet. I talked with my grandmother, sisters and parents, everyone accepted and forgave me, and it was on that very day that I realized that they were always behind me and that I was ready to return to them, forget about the past and build the future that I always dreamed of, to have a family.